So I was at the bottom of my list, home. But my mother's first words were, "Are you okay?" No condemnation, no berating words, just words of unconditional love and grace. Romans 2:4 says that it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. It's not God's wrath. It's not God's punishment, but it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. And even on that miserable day, God was pouring out his irresistible grace and drawing me to himself through the words of my mother. Actually, my mother was excited to get that phone call, if you can believe it or not, because I hadn't called home in years. And she knew without a doubt that this was God's answer to her prayers. And as she hung up the phone, fighting back the tears, she knew she had to do just as that good old hymn says. Count your blessings. Name them one by one. As my years in prison passed, she kept adding to this list of blessings. And today, this list of blessings is longer and taller than she is. Both sides. 3 days later, as I was walking around the cell block, and to be honest, I actually was trying to stay to myself and stay away from those criminals, because of course I didn't think I was a criminal. And I passed by this garbage can. And as I looked at this garbage can, I thought, this trash represents my life. And with my head down, I was about to pass by this garbage can. But something on top of the trash caught my eye. I bent over and I picked it up, and it was a Gideon's New Testament. I took the New Testament back to my cell, and for the very first time, I opened up the Bible, and I read through the entire Gospel of Mark that first night. But let me tell you something. I certainly didn't think, okay, this is going to be the answer to all my problems. But rather, I thought, I've got enormous time on my hands, and I have to pass it somehow, and this is the only book that I had. But as many of you know, what we have in our Bibles is not just ink on paper, but what we have is the very breath of God. And it is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, able to cut through the hardest of hearts, exposing my sin and my rebellion. And it wasn't a pretty sight. And I didn't think things could get any worse. I was wrong. A couple weeks later, I was called into the nurse's office alone. They handcuffed me, chained my hands around my waist, shackled my feet together, and I shuffled into the nurse's office. She sat me down and shut the door behind me. And immediately I knew something was not right. She was uncomfortably struggling with her words and couldn't even give me eye contact. So she finally resigned to writing something on a small piece of paper and slowly slid it across the desk to me. I looked down and I saw 3 letters and a symbol. It read HIV, positive. The days after were dark and lonely. I was sentenced to 6 years, which is much better than 12 years to life. But news of my HIV status was like a death sentence. One night, as I was laying in my bunk, I noticed in the metal bed above me, someone had scribbled something. And it read, "If you're bored, read Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." You see, at the most hopeless point in my life, God was using the words penned by a prophet thousands of years ago to a rebellious nation to tell me that regardless of who I was and what I had done in the past, He still had a plan for me. I had no idea where this plan was going to take me, but God gave me enough faith, enough strength to take that one step to get through that one day, and then the next,